Father, thank you for this day in the city in which we live. Guide us this afternoon as we make our decisions. In Christ's name. Amen. This is a special call meeting of the Newnan City Council to discuss a piece of unfinished business that is a continuation of the February 25th 2020 agenda item. This is a consideration of an ordinance with the purpose of adopting an amendment to Article 6, Section 614 of the zoning ordinance of the City of Newnan pertaining to mixed-use development district. When this came up on our regular agenda, I thought it needed more time for discussion than we were able to give it that particular evening. So the council was gracious in deciding that we would have a brief work session this afternoon to have staff go over some of the background on the mixed-use development ordinance and provide us with information so we can make a decision on adoption. So, Smith, thank you for being here today. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Hopefully we'll kind of run through this quick. We have a brief presentation to kind of talk about the history of how we developed this and where we are right now with it. The mixed-use development district was first adopted back in August of 2000 when we did the first rewrite of the zoning ordinance. At that time, there was basically an overlay. There was an MXD1 or MXD2, and you had a choice between the two depending on what the underlying zoning of the property was. And that version was very restricted. There was a table, some of you may remember in there, of permitted uses, prohibited uses, and different guidelines on percentage of uses. Only one project was ever approved under that ordinance. That was the Newnan Lost project. Here is the concept plan from that time, and you can see, many of you are familiar with this, Berry Avenue to the north, Murray Street to this, down near the bottom to the east, East Washington to the south. And it is a reinvestment of an old property. I think it was a cotton mill, I understand. And now when you go through it, you see here's some examples of what it looks like today. They really didn't change much on the outside, but there's a mixture of apartments, there's a mixture of commercial. In September of 2017, we looked at this again. We amended it to Article 6 of the 2017 ordinance, and we made the changes to try to promote more creativity in design, lessen the restrictions on uses to allow developers to present something to us that'd be more of an open palette of various use types, and providing opportunities for new designs and non-traditional visions is what we talked about and what we discussed. One project was approved since 2017. That was the Springs at Newnan, located off Newnan Crossing Bypass. And this was the concept plan used at that time. And as you can see, it pretty much ended up being a split. There's not so much a mixture in here. It's mainly a residential here with the potential for commercial at some point in the future. These were the illustrations that were provided at that time, and all the illustrations that were provided are just of the residential portion of the MXD. So since 2017, we've entertained 3 applications. One was approved, one was rejected, and one is pending. It comes before the Planning Commission tonight. So why change now? We began analyzing the past applications and concluded that what we were seeing were simply veiled intents for split zonings and or attempts to increase density over a traditional zoning district. The applications that have been received thus far have been less of the mixed-use design than what we felt and what we think you felt you wanted when we looked at this in 2017. So, time to make a change. The goals of this are to clearly define expectations, not split zoning, nor attempts to seek an increase in density for a specific project. To promote a mixture of residential uses, not just apartments. And that's some of the language in this new proposed amendments, that we need to see different types of residential units. And that must be built as a single integrated design entity with one ownership. That'll be over the whole project, not build apartments first and then create a field of dreams for commercial that may or may not happen. And we've provided examples in the ordinance of design elements we want to see MXD applications come in. Something we think you all would like to see come in. And these are some of those examples. You have the same, these are also in the ordinance you've been provided copies with. And we've added this following language, that you and us can make changes during this process when an application comes in. If we don't like a concept, we can suggest changes. They can come back to us. And it puts you in the driver's seat of what you want to see. This was not in the previous incantations we've had of that MXD ordinance. And that's real brief, real thumbnail sketch of where we are and what we're bringing to you today.
Any questions or comments from council regarding the ordinance and issue, Mr. Alexander?
One of the concerns I have, or questions, was, did council come to staff and say, hey, we want to see this? Or did this just occur because staff said, hey, we want to make this?
It originated primarily from staff.
Primarily?
Mhm.
Okay.
But I did have conversations with Mr. Phillips about the fact that what we were seeing was exactly what he said at the beginning. We were seeing a veiled attempt at increased densities on residential and in particular I mean, I'll just call it out, the one out on the bypass that we approved.
Right.
It was residential, there's no commercial there, I don't know if they've got a date line to start the commercial, but that's one thing that's important to me in this, is that we make sure that this, as adopted, has a component in there that requires that those two components of commercial, residential, or if it's a mix of residential, that all of the mixes, if I'll just use that word, so that would include commercial, be permitted close together, and certainly nothing that's residential given a CO until the commercial component is up and alive. I mean, that's the purpose of this.
And I understand that. I would have liked for staff to maybe come to all of us and ask our opinion or gotten our input.
That's what we're doing today, George.
Well, I know, but it was all written prior to.
That's the reason I didn't want to, in the end of February, adopt it. It was written so that we'd have a work session. You have your opportunity today to give your opinion. I'm not looking for an adoption today.
Okay, but it just, was sent to I just feel it would have gone to all of us and said, hey, we're looking at doing this. And hey, we'd like direction, and we send that direction, so.
Well, that's what we're
I'll
doing
leave it at
today,
that.
Mr. Alexander.
What's that?
That's what we're doing today.
I'm saying in the beginning, so.
Well, okay, that's not the way our process works. You were on the planning commission for years. You understand that it drives through staff, through the planning commission, then down to us for our
I'm not
input.
talking about that.
Mr.
I'm
Shelley?
talking that
I have a question about the
Sure.
planning commission. Had they looked at this?
They being who?
Planning commission.
Oh, yes, sir, they looked at this.
That's
And they
the way
came
our
back.
process works. I mean, an idea,
That was I had it written down, I just wanted to know.
right, and an idea is generated from staff or council, and it passes on through staff to the planning commission. Planning commission has, in fact, the planning commission took 2 months, 2 separate meetings.
We did a information only, where we gave them kind of a proposed, and we came back, and they made some suggestions, and we changed it and brought it back for a public hearing.
Right.
So that's why they had a little bit more opportunity there. But, as a recommendation board, that's kind of a lot of what they do. And so the process was very similar to what we've done in the past when we've initiated text amendments. Normally, the difference is if somebody from the outside wants to come in and initiate a text amendment, they usually will come here first for a referral to the planning commission. But in cases where we've initiated it, a lot of times we go to the planning commission and then come to you all later.
Well, and that's the proper procedure.
Right.
Yeah.
I think what I'd like to guard against, and maybe this is going to help, is that we don't take a big project and, as you said, develop it. It seems like it always wants to develop residential first, and then they sell it off or whatever, and they forget about the mixed-use component completely. There's some way we can hold their feet to the fire and get it coming out of the.
The way I read it, it's in the things you can't, when you file that plan, and that goes with the property, you sell it, it's still there. You gotta do it.
But is there a time frame that they have to develop commercial?
I don't know that.
I think that may be a situation, as we've added language in here, where that would be case-specific. Where you have an application come before you as rezoning, it could be a proper condition you add as a part of that application. If that application you feel like is insufficient in answering that question, then council can ask that to be a proper condition. We need to have a timetable of when that will be developed.
Because in some cases, if you're gonna build a building, let's just say commercial on the ground and residential, I mean, you have to build the building, whether you get a tenant or not, that's hard to require.
Mhm.
If you build the building and have it not finished, but almost finished on the outside as far as the thing, then that would be that case where you had to do it. The other side of it is when you, like, the apartments out there with that thing, they don't have to do that commercial in order to build a residential.
It wasn't tied in as a condition of approval.
Oh, and I'm not so certain that I want it as a proffered condition. I want it as a requirement of the ordinance. Is it in there as a requirement of the ordinance?
It is in there that we've added as an integrative design entity. That's all, when you approve it, you're approving an integrated design.
It's not specifically stated, it's like you.
I want it,
stated.
I want it,
I know what you're.
I want it in your face requirement that these two, if you're, that's my opinion. Someone else on council may feel differently. But if you're gonna come into the city of Newnan and you're gonna opt for a mixed-use development, I want you to have to build a mixed-use development on the backside. Not you get into the process and somebody raises their hand and says, one of the members of the planning commission or the council, and says, would you proffer that you would do that for us, please? I don't want it to work like that.
I'm not questioning, but now there are places in there where he talked about to get a CO on the residential, you have to start in the other part of the mixed thing. Now, I don't know what that said, really. But I remember
That's
that
it.
being in there.
Well, you can add that to it.
I thought it was already in there.
Well, there's a difference though, if you start it, but then they never finish it, then what?
Well, let's go back to what I was saying in commercial. You can't make somebody have a tenant. They want
No.
a tenant. So you can make them build the building with the finish not done now. That's where I don't know the answer to. I'm just
Right.
saying. But there's something in here about getting a CO for the residential if you don't have started the commercial or something like that. I can't remember exactly where it said that, but it was something.
I'm not saying force them to have a tenant in the commercial, but at least have it ready.
Well, there's no investor I know who builds a commercial building and then does not want to go out and find a tenant to give them a return on their investment.
That's what I'm saying. If they build a commercial building, then
They'll
that's
seek
all
a
you can
tenant.
require.
Right.
But I thought something said that they had to do part of it in here. I didn't just dream that.
Is that in the ordinance, Mr. Mayor?
I don't recall it being
No,
in
it's
there.
not in
That's why I'm double checking.
All right, are we gonna go, another question. Are we gonna go page by page, or we just gonna pick at it?
However you like.
Yep, we're here for,
That's fine with me.
Which
if
way?
it takes longer than the next 45 minutes, we'll keep going on another section.
Let's just start
I'm
page
not
by-
looking for an,
No,
for an
let's just go
adoption.
page by page, because I got questions.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, on the, couple of places where it says,
What page are you on?
let's see,
Two?
okay. I guess it's, the pages aren't, yeah, they are, third page. Okay. In that first thing where it says utilities waived by founding of city staff, that they have to have sewage, water, so the city staff can waive that requirement?
Let's see where you are. You're on
All right,
page
the first
3.
paragraph under A, under utilities. The adaptive reuse development has this provision waived by finding of the city council that they have public water and sewer.
May have a shaded four,
City staff.
Do what now?
maybe the shaded four.
Oh, the shaded 4. Utilities, public, all utilities.
Section 8,
Adaptive reuse development may have a provision waived.
placing it under blank.
There are situations,
I understand
industrial
that, but I
property.
mean, does the staff say that fits and then it's gone?
Well, there are cases where new utilities will not be able to service certain projects and they prefer septic tanks. We have a situation like that on Wall Street right now, where the cost to run sewer underneath the railroad to Wall Street is going to be prohibitive, so they've allowed a septic tank system to be installed. So you have to have some allowance for
I
that.
understand what you're saying. I didn't say, what I said, who waives it? The staff or the city council?
It would be up to staff during our review that new utilities, along with engineering, would take a look at that and make a recommendation during the site plan.
All right, but you make a recommendation. Do you waive it or does the city council waive it, is my question. The staff waive it or the council?
Staff waives it.
Okay. All right. Down here in the next thing where it talks about the sidewalks, and they talk about the fact that if you want a sidewalk a certain feet wide, you don't have to have the, but if you go so many feet, you have to have a tree.
Right, that's from our sidewalk ordinance, the
Okay.
current regulation.
What I want in there is specific trees. I don't want the cheapest tree they can get in there that's the wrong tree for the wrong place, because we got some trees around town that are planted that are the wrong trees. They're too big for the space. If you start putting one of those 3x3 sidewalk places for a tree, and you go put a white oak in there, the thing's gonna grow forever and gonna be a problem. I want a specific tree that's not that's a small tree that stays small. And it doesn't filter all the light out of the sidewalk. It doesn't block the signage for people's and to see the buildings or the signs. but there are trees that fit that requirement planted every day. And they may cost a lot more, I don't care, but that's what I want is a better tree restriction where we don't have bad trees that create problems 20 years from now.
You still got the floor.
Oh, okay.
I mean, yeah, I'm gonna let you just go
All
through
right.
your comments.
Parking. Can you explain some of that? Because one place it says you have to have separate from commercial and residential.
And
It
then-
says, each use shall determine its share of the required
See,
parking.
Sharing, to me, and I don't know, because each case is gonna be different, sharing would be better because you're gonna create less runoff. And typically, an office parking is used in the day, and residential is used at night. Now, on the weekends, Saturday may be a conflict, but sometimes you would be better off sharing the parking and not building more parking to accommodate both of them and just doubling up on parking.
Okay.
I don't know how we fix that, but I think could be a bad situation where we force them to have parking they don't need, and we don't want.
Well, we want to try to encourage, I hope, off-street parking as ideally the goal. And a shared parking plan, maybe it'll take advantage like we have with several of those uses. And that's one of the requirements, the traffic engineer get together a shared parking plan.
And I
But-
saw the thing in there where it talked about a certified traffic engineer.
Correct.
Because there are cases where they literally design parking spaces for that, where somebody parks at night and somebody parks at day, but it's not the same, it's the same
Correct.
parking space. And so I'd like to make sure we have that opportunity to restrict the amount of parking built unless we need it.
Okay.
And there were some waivers in there, and all this 20% could be waived. But I just think at times, especially out there on the bypass, there's so much parking out there that we don't need. Anybody else jump in if you want to?
Well, I had a question on the 20%. How'd you come up with the 20%?
That was an element that was in the previous incantation. We did not change that with this one. That was in the one that was adopted 2017.
And that's
I
not a
think
bad
that's-
thing,
Okay.
see, where it says may be waived, because that may fit the situation I'm concerned about, I don't know.
Well, that would reduce your amount from 100% to 80%.
Yeah,
So that'd be a little bit less parking.
So the council would waive that, or would staff waive that?
It would be waived with an approved plan, so it would be maybe a tag team combination of staff and council. Was the plan's gonna be approved as a component of the rezoning process?
Yeah, I think
And
it's
as a
important to
condition.
know there is no property zone in MXD, and every MXD proposal has to come before this body.
That's
for
right.
rezoning. So yes, everything that you're talking about would be in a project-specific ordinance. And one other thing I think I wanna, maybe discuss or clarify, maybe what I'm hearing here, obviously our amendment that we proposed was relatively minor. We were just trying to clarify the intent and the integration. The things that we've been talking about so far were items that were in the existing ordinance that was adopted by this body in 2017. So if I'm hearing that we're wanting to more of a complete overhaul, we may need to change directions because obviously what we presented to you today was a small, it appears we're looking back at the existing
All right.
ordinance conditions.
We've opened it up.
We have, that's what
and
it'll do.
I don't necessarily want to change the whole thing, I'm just saying, there's some points I want clarified where that they don't automatically get something that we don't want them to have without us having to say yes or no.
Yeah, and like I said, we've opened this up and it's in front of us. There's no reason to not to step through the process.
Like I said, the tree thing is specific, but some things are very general, and I don't know the answer, that's why I want you to tell me, but as long as we got a way to sit there and look at it and say, no, that doesn't really, my opinion and Keith's opinion may be different, that's what I wanted to say, be more specific about what we do want as a group, and I think most in general, everybody wants the same thing, it's just very little fine points sometimes.
But then and that comes in looking at the site that's been proposed
Yeah,
before.
that's what, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the world of planning, in MXD, are there any things that are practices done in other areas that we may be missing out on that you could suggest?
We try to
It seems
incorporate,
like we're building this on
well, we
past ordinance.
try to incorporate some of those, and a lot of this is incorporated from other municipalities and jurisdictions. The design ideas that we've put illustrations have come from other similar ordinances. So we looked around at different jurisdictions to see what they're doing. Some are a lot more liberal than we are. We try to be conservative with it. And we try to look at those things that we have presented. Initially, we try to address what we didn't want to see from our project. And then we also want to keep those elements we thought were good, give you some options. And to encourage people to pursue this, but with the idea they can't pursue it just simply because we're also all of a sudden opportunity zone and they want to put a bunch of apartments on a place.
Michelle?
Okay. Let's see. Now I'm on page 5.
Get you on that.
Anybody
I'm
see
fine,
it?
fine, I'm fine.
Come join the meeting.
Yeah. I'm on page 5.
I'm here.
Under section 618D. All right, does our present ordinances restrict some of this, what's called offensive noise and late night activity?
Does not, other than what we have, just a
See,
general
I think that's
parameters.
so wide open. I mean, late night for somebody that goes to bed at 2 is one thing, late night for me is 10, And
We-
offensive noise, we've gone through the problems of trying to define noise, and that's really hard to do. So I don't know whether we need to tighten that up
Or just simply refer to the city's noise ordinance.
pardon?
Or just simply refer to the city's noise ordinance as the guiding
Yeah,
document.
or something in there.
That would be my
Because
opinion.
I don't know, we set the hours of, I think, neighborhood activities.
We did.
as far as time,
We did.
And those are not, right, I mean, this is residential next to commercial, and I think some of that, I mean, without being too restrictive to a commercial, wouldn't be bad for residential.
Okay.
Right, just refer to the noise on. And we
I think
set
that'd be,
ourselves up for two
I think
different-
that's an easy fix.
Okay. Okay. On page 6, under 619.
Before we go ahead, I wanted to get to this storage of refuse, I call it garbage.
Okay.
But I noticed in some of these new apartment complexes, there seems to be an awful lot of trash that's not fitting into the dumpsters. Do we need to look at what we're requiring, or is that?
That's simply an enforcement issue. You'll have that happen from time to time where you have an apartment complex that maybe is not having their trash compactor and dumpster serviced frequently, or is lapsed in their payment. But there is an ordinance under Chapter 17 of the Code of Ordinances that specifically engages the code enforcement officer to have certain police powers to go out there and supervise that, make sure that gets emptied out on a regular basis.
Thank you, Ray. All right, anybody else before 619A1? Explain that. I think I understand it, but explain this thing about the building height greater than the distance from adjoining property and da-da-da-da.
Well, if you have a house that's 15 feet tall, and you want to do a commercial building or a building next to it, and the distance from that house is 15 feet tall is, let's say, 50 feet, then that building can't be more than 50 feet.
All right, is that the building on the property, or is that the building next door?
That's the building on the property, next door to the residential use side.
All right, so you got a residential 15-foot high, and your commercial, you can't be any more height.
Then that
wide
distance-
than the distance it is.
Yeah, and then the distance from that building with its setbacks to that structure.
All right, and I don't doubt anything about it. Explain why.
We didn't want to have a bunch of overshadowing buildings,
Or what?
buildings towering 4 or 5 stories, overshadowing,
Yeah,
homes, particularly if we look at sensitive areas like near the historic districts.
okay. All right, that makes sense.
If you look at like Greenville Street, LaGrange Street, and the height of the buildings and the width of the street, that all has a certain harmony to it. And I think that's what you're trying to do.
That's correct. We don't want to be disharmonious to the surrounding neighborhood.
Okay, that's fine. I want to make sure why, because I know that the new townhouses on Grange they're high in places, and they'll block the sun in the early morning from the places, but I didn't know whether that's part of that or not.
Well, it's certainly a thought, but they didn't go through MXD either, so they would be a separate, but that was, that was an issue that was addressed through our thinking process on this mixed-use development.
Okay. All right, under minimum landscaping, I want us, there's a place in here where it talks about having a certain percentage and stuff like that. I don't wanna just suggest, I wanna make sure that we have good landscaping in these places. And people typically are gonna do the least costly that they can. And not complain, but like downtown where we've got Leary oak planted in some of the planters. Well, the contractor never cleaned out the concrete, therefore the Leary oak never took, and then a few people walk on it and it dies. And if they'd scooped it out real good, put some solid, compact dirt with good thing, that stuff might have lived. And I don't know how we define that, but in general, sometimes they just do the cheapest thing they can. And certain owners, builders do a great job because they take pride in so many of them. They're going to subcontract somebody to do the cheapest job they can. I just want to make sure we have good landscaping, not just landscaping requirements. And I don't know how you do it.
How does this ordinance reference back to our landscape ordinance?
The first paragraph talks about when you submit a plan, it's got to meet the requirements of our current tree preservation landscaping ordinance. It talks about how the entry point's got to be more attractive. It's almost like a quality development corridor overlay, because you've got that 15-foot landscape strip. You've also have that lower Fayetteville Road commercial landscape corridor that we passed some years ago that has in there specific planting palette. It talks about the types of bushes you got to have, the types of trees you got to have, and it's very specific. We could even refer to that, if you wanted to, for the purposes of plantings along the road. The landscape ordinance is very specific on the number of units, trees that have to be on a piece of property based on the type of property it is, if it's residential, commercial, or industrial. It specifies what types of trees have to be planted. It gives you a choice of them. If they're large canopy trees, shade trees, in between those shade trees, you have to have a certain amount of shrubbery. You get down to smaller, flowering trees. So it's got a number of very detailed provisions. The issue you're maybe referring to has to do with the installation.
Well, both.
Yeah.
I mean, I like the idea of having the rules about what type and all that kind of stuff, but the installation too, I don't know whether we have that problem, but I just seen it sometimes, it seems to happen.
Well,
Flatten a couple of trees
developers
up and-
post a bond after a project. It's usually a 2-year maintenance landscape bond.
Okay.
So if anything dies within 2 years, they're supposed to replace it, or the city has the money to go and replace it and improve it.
One of the
I wanna add
questions,
a little bit more to that.
one of the questions I have is, when you refer to the landscape plan meeting the requirements of the tree preservation and landscaping ordinance, I understand that. But you go down to F, and it says a minimum of 5% of the project shall be landscaped. Why would you put a minimum of 5%? Because I would think, if I'm correct, tree preservation and landscaping ordinance requires more than 5%.
Not necessarily, depends on the situation. If it's a refit, a retrograde, it may not necessarily kick into play. Depends on, but that's why we put a minimum in there to make sure that there is consideration given when they look at a retrograde site as well as a brand-new site.
Okay, so in that case, our tree preservation and landscaping ordinance would,
That's something that we're
Supersede.
trying to, in this update of the tree preservation landscape ordinance, we're trying to find better symmetry. Because what we have found over the past 20 years of administering the landscape ordinance is it's not a one-size-fits-all.
right,
You've got different land uses, you got different densities, you got different lot coverages, et cetera. You got different lots that got existing trees. And just having a straight X number of trees per acre, it certainly doesn't fit. So we're
Right.
trying to marry the two better in the revised. I'm not gonna say we'll ever have a perfect marriage, just because there's so many differences. But one example I'd like to point out, zoning in a CBD, Central Business District, allows you to build from property line to property line.
yes,
So in that particular case, someone could
5%.
come in and build from property line to property line.
Exactly.
And 5% would probably have to be rooftop planting,
okay.
because there is no.
And I was gonna say rooftop or even just a nice container type.
So those are the things,
where
that's
they-
right. That's
and you
what we're
could-
trying to integrate it, and there's no great answer, but we know that we can do a better job of it. So that's one of the focuses of the rewrite.
And I'm just trying to make sure we're covered, because in the past where we have been snookered on some of these things because the way it was written. So I'm just trying to make sure that this is covered. And it sounds like you're covering it, so. Thank you.
I had underlined this in this section 21, open space requirements, under A, number 5, and then it refers to that, and that seems fine to me. I just wonder whether does that have some basis, that required open space for 20% residential, 12 office, does that have some basis in the world, or we just pull it up?
I think that is a common number you're gonna see in a land use zoning world, but again, when you come back to application, where that 20% is measured, or where the intent is for the 20%. If you're using a suburban piece of undeveloped tract, you may get 20% around the perimeter and periphery, wetlands, floodplains, other green tree safe areas. But if you're in an urban environment, in a redevelopment situation, you know, the green space may be the planting areas, the curves, the islands.
I understand.
So again, we're not in this one size fits all, which does make it a little difficult. And I'm with you, I don't know how that 20% consistently
It
applies.
seemed okay, but I don't know.
I don't either.
It could be parks, recreation areas, some
But
amenities.
where did it come about, those numbers? Is that something in y'all's?
It came about, I think, as a result of the consultant, because this was in the previous 2017. I think when we hired the consultant to help us through this,
Okay.
they had researched that, and that came across as a common denominator.
Exactly where it came from.
That's fine, not always, but sometimes consultants have some basis for what they're proposing, so that's fine.
Okay.
And that part in this thing where you're, on the next page below that, where you're talking about the floodplain and the wetland, I mean, they could theoretically cut that property off the wetland, right? And make it a different tract of land. If they had too much wetland, if you had one good piece with a bunch of wetland, right?
They could, if they met the lot dimension requirements, to make that a separate tract.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, sometimes it might be in our advantage if they do fix the good piece of property. And, I mean, I can think of some wetlands where they dominate the piece of property and you don't want to.
Well, we have that right now with a current applicant that wants to do age-restricted development over off Newnan Crossing Boulevard East. They're going to cut off a part of it that buffers the streams they don't want, so.
But we, I mean, like, in that case, we can waive, if somebody came and said, look, I kept everything y'all got except this particular thing, we have the right to waive that one
You do.
requirement specific, right, for that particular case. Okay.
Applicants is specific.
The waiving of the open space in page 9 at the top, paragraph A. Who would waive that? Was that, again, city council?
Where are we now?
Maybe reduced?
It'd be part of the plan. It would be up to the council
Okay.
to approve that based on the plan they presented.
Because if they built next to a park and they say, I'm gonna fall into that category, then we say, okay. Okay. So there's something here about the CO.
The street, what is the street frontage requirement right now for townhomes and mixed-family dwellings?
I think that for townhomes, it's 30 feet, 45, 30 feet for lot frontage.
45.
I'd have to look it up exactly, I'm not sure. It's between 35 and 45 feet, somewhere around there. It's 75 feet depending on zoning for single families. So it's either 30 or 35 or 45 feet, maybe down to 30 depending on. But if it's a condominium style, there is no frontage requirement. It's only a fee simple townhome that you have a lot frontage
Will
requirement.
that affect parking in any way
No, because it's 1.5 spaces per residential unit
for mixed?
for mixed. I mean, depending on the parking plan. Now, we encourage shared parking, so that's why they have, as part of their concept and as part of their application, they will have that looked at and studied. and present a plan that takes advantage of those off hours between commercial and residential.
Okay, I found what I was talking about earlier, and maybe some of what Keith was talking about on page 8, that number G, open space, and set aside where it says the certificates of occupancy issued on the 1/3 of the total number of residents shall be construction as part of the project. And if the residential uses not part of the project, such open spaces can be where the first 25% of the commercial. Well, somewhere there, that doesn't exactly get what we wanted, but that's where we ought to say both of them, right? That they're gonna have to make some effort to get part of that. But they got a big plan. They want to build some residential and start, then they're gonna have to build some commercial to start. And they can go down the line, and they don't have to build it all, but they ought to get started on some of it. And that's not necessarily there, but that's part of what's, could be there, right?
I mean, certainly, if that's something you want us to look at adding,
Because I don't want them just to build an apartment building and have a commercial over here that never gets built, right?
And that's what could possibly happen out on the bypass.
Exactly.
I mean, it's sitting there, and we have no requirement for them to come forward.
no plans have been brought to us for anything commercial yet.
That's what I do not want, my opinion, do not want to have happen again.
Because we'd rather them not start it, they're not gonna do it.
Exactly. If we can't approve a site plan that provides for all of it in a way that constructs all of it, then it's not a good plan. If they can't bring a project that's financially feasible to do the whole thing, then they just don't have a project.
You are saying that the apartments and the commercial aspect would have to be completed at the same time. Am I hearing you correctly? I mean, that's why I would see
on
it.
the final thing, yes. Now, you may proportion it out, but, where you do part of it now and part of it, the part residential, part commercial, you go down the line doing it, to keep some ratio together.
But at the end of the day, when
When they
they
finish that
take
residential,
CO,
they
for
gotta
example,
finish
it
that
has to
commercial.
be, both projects would have to be complete and
Whether they've rented anything or not.
Right.
Right.
Well, and I'm not worried, again, not worried about that. Anybody who builds a building is gonna put a
Sure,
tenant in
maybe their
there as
object is to-
quickly as they can.
Right.
But, and I wouldn't be so opposed to a site plan that we were asked to approve that was phased. So, like you said, 1/3 of the phase, 1/3 of the commercial, 2/3 of the phase, residential, 2/3 of the commercial. The full residential, the full commercial. I don't have a problem with that. It's just gotta trail along with one another.
And if they know that up front and they can't see the end of the line, then don't start it.
Or you may want to put a requirement that the commercial has to be started before the last residential CO could be issued.
No.
You don't want that?
No.
Okay,
No.
Not started.
all
It
right,
has to be done in conjunction with
I
one
got you.
another.
okay.
Because if you got
Like
an
a
office
ratio.
building, a commercial building downtown, it's gonna be, commercial in this and then apartments up front. That's gonna all be done. I mean, whether it's rented or not, it's still gonna be done. But you go out on an empty piece of land and you start building a mixed-use thing with work, play, and all that kind of stuff, sometimes you don't build one of them if you
Well,
don't
I
have time.
think Councilman Michelle said it real well. If we clarify these in the ordinance, and when a potential applicant comes in and looks at the ordinance and what we're going to be expecting, if they can't deliver, they're probably not even going to apply.
That's the point.
That's right, we're just trying to clarify the intent. And if they want to apply, then it's this council's discretion to approve that final overall plan. So I think it helps to clarify, not just for you, but for the applicant, what the expectation and requirement
Save
is.
them time and money,
That's
y'all
right.
time and money.
And I like the ratio that you were talking about.
Figure that out. We
You
can
know,
come up with some language.
In the universe of those people who actually do mixed-use development and aren't just apartment people or commercial people, but do it together, and they understand that reading that ordinance isn't gonna scare them off. They're gonna say, this is what we do. And so that's who we want to have in front of us. Okay.
Okay.
Anyone else? Got anything else?
Anybody else break in anytime they want to? I think that's all, no, let's see. All right, one thing here on page 16, under section 626H, okay? I want to make sure how we do this, and this goes back to what you're talking about starting, where it says, we may make them change something. If we're gonna make them change it and go through, jumping through a bunch of hoops, then I want that to be it, that's gonna be approved. If we're not gonna approve it, even if they jump through the hoops, then let's don't make them jump through the hoops, if you follow me.
Where are you looking at?
On page 16, under H, under that first section, 626, it says,
Oh,
during the thing, may require changes or alterations in the master concept plan during the approval process in order to further promote intent and standards of the MXD. And I don't know how to say it, but what I'm saying is this: if we come in here and say, we don't like this one piece right here, okay? All right, well, I'll change it. Goes to the engineering, goes to the design, changes it, comes back, and then we say no. We wasted his time and money and our time and money. If we make a requirement, unless they don't follow what we say, I want us to say, yes, we're gonna approve that if you make that change. You see what I'm saying? If we can work that in there, and I don't know how we do that.
Well, and that's kind of
I've seen this not.
that's kind of on the applicant to look at this body and say, if I make that change, do I have your approval?
I see. Okay.
That is a closing the sale question.
It'd be hard to have it like that.
Yeah.
On the, out on a bypass, as I was looking through this, was out on a bypass, did we have any kind of a units per acre restriction on that, or is it just they applied and we decided yea or nay?
Do you recall if that was based on a residential multifamily use per acre?
As part of any MSD, I mean, you come in and set what your density is, you set your setbacks, you set all that. So they came in, requested 320 units, and then the commercial up front.
Okay, so it's really the units per acre will be at the discretion of the council, according to this.
That's correct. Because there's an
Yeah.
MXD coming before you, that's part of Ashley Park,
Right,
another phase 3. And those units per acre are not going to be 12 units per acre.
Right.
But, so then they're therefore asking for a lot more than what our highest would allow. But the question is that an appropriate place? And that's part of what you look at when they bring you the development plan.
Right.
okay.
It's up to us to set the number and to approve the site. Mighty quiet. Got anything?
I'm listening, y'all are,
You listening?
yep,
Okay.
That's all.
take it in.
Anybody else?
All right.
Good job.
Yeah, I want to make sure everybody had an opportunity to weigh in.
So if I could just recap, if you don't mind, just some of the things I heard, and let's make sure that we're talking about this. I think the primary concern that I hear is that we want to make sure that we address in some form, shape, or manner that when you have an MXD, that you will do commercial and residential in phases or en masse at the same time. That some progress to be made on both of those two diverse uses. Secondly, you want us to be more specific on the types of trees that we're going to plant along the roads.
Can I back up just a second?
Yes.
You said those two diverse uses, and I would offer the language, all diverse uses.
Okay.
That's all you gotta have is
Not
two uses to fit in a mix.
Two minimum,
Well, but it's got to
two
be.
diverse uses,
But
yes.
for what I want everything that's diverse to be moving along at the same track.
I got you.
Whether
Okay.
it's commercial or recreation or residential, the whole plan needs to be advanced together
Okay.
in order for it to be really what it is, a mixed-use development.
I think we can do that easily. And then there's some, there's some tweaking to do on the sidewalk side of plantings, trees specifically. And you mentioned a concern over too much parking, but I think you have the ability to look at that on a site to address that, and we don't restrict
This
it.
is where I'm coming from. Now, you got elbows on a bypass, and you've got Target. We got so much parking there, you could never fill that place up. And I don't want us to put requirements that they build so much parking in for commercial and so much for residential that we got, in 20 years from now, with autonomous cars, we may not need as much parking then as we need now.
Okay.
So I just don't want to overbuild the parking and create extra runoff that we don't really need in our system, just because we require it.
Okay.
Now, most people that you're talking about that really know what they're doing, they know how much parking they want. And if they come in here and say, okay, we only need 10% of the parking requirements you've got, and this is why, and they lay it out, okay, that makes sense, because you're gonna have nobody that has a car in your thing. That's fine. But I don't want them to just automatically build in some number of parking that they don't need.
Gotcha. And the other thing is just simply to refer to the city's noise ordinance on that one particular section where you're talking about the two different uses.
Where it's clear, it's not
Okay.
just gray.
We can make those adjustments and get something back to you to look at.
Sure. And that's an opportunity, of course, we have two council members who aren't here today, so they'll have an opportunity to review that and weigh in at that time too. Not sure how long you think that takes. Are you at our next meeting or are you in April?
We can have something at your next meeting.
Okay,
I don't think these changes are gonna be, just a few tweaks.
okay. Mr. Sears, refresh what we need to do here on advertising. Do we need to re-advertise or?
You just have to continue it. You've advertised it for the,
Continued it.
you continued it from the last meeting.
Yes, that's what we've done today is continue.
If you do it to the next meeting, continue it to the next meeting, I think you would be all right. However, if you continued it beyond then you
Right.
probably need to re-advertise.
Okay, well then the clock is ticking, Mr. Smith, because I'm about to ask for a motion to continue this item to our second meeting in March, which is the 24th, I believe.
Yes.
Yes.
At some point in time, was a public, that was at that point in time, or when they were?
We're continuing that public hearing, so at that time, the public hearing has been open.
Okay.
So,
I just like somebody else to make a comment sometimes.
you did a fine job, thank you. Okay, is there a motion?
So moved
So,
to
motion,
continue
yeah.
till the 24th of
Second.
March.
Second.
A motion and a second to continue this item as an agenda item until the 24th of March. Any discussion or further comments? Staff's got direction. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion
Second.
and a second to adjourn. All those in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you. Our next meeting starts in 13 minutes.